Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Heather, and on this channel we like to walk a very fine line between a shopping addicted makeup monster and a responsible adult with a makeup hobby. Now, I really enjoy eyeshadows, singles, duochromes, multichromes, blush, highlight, lip gloss, basically everything except pressed glitter, and today we're going to be doing my top 3 palettes in every category. If that sounds like something you're interested in, stick with me, we're getting into it right now. So originally, of course, my plan was to do my December palette ranking and then my all of 2023 palette ranking videos at the end of December. However, my personal life is not going to allow for that. So I'm hoping to get those videos up for you in the beginning of January just to kind of do my end of the year wrap up stuff. But for now, I thought another video talking about a bunch of palettes I love would be more than welcome. So some of these categories are based on color story, some are based on size, so we're just going to kind of dive in and jump around a little bit. I guess what I'll do is start with the small palettes, and I would say the order that I show them in is not necessarily the order that I would like rank them in. These 3 though are just the top 3 compared to all of my other small palettes, and that kind of carries true for the rest of these collections as well. So in the small palette category, I have the Collabs Astro Pink. This is a volume 3. They don't make this palette anymore, unfortunately, but I do think it's a beautiful color story. The 2 mattes over here I think are very, very similar, so do you need both of them? No, that's my only like real gripe with this palette, but the rest of the palette is beautiful. The metallics in here are wonderful quality, so it definitely had to be mentioned. ColourPop High Tide. This is one of my favorites. The day this launched, I like raced from brunch to go get this because I wanted to try it out so badly. This sort of like aqua teal color story is definitely my vibe. This particular shade here is absolutely gorgeous. It's a duochrome type shade, so overall I had to make sure that I included this one. And then lastly in the small category is Or Kid You Not. Now the mirror in mine broke out. Not broke out, it wasn't ever glued down, so it just pops out, which is alarming. But this is the Or Kid You Not color story, and it's just a beautiful set of like burgundy purple shades. I think the metallics in here are really complementary as well. I like that it's so deep and like sultry and smoky compared to a lot of what ColourPop does is pretty light, so this one I had to make a mention. Okay, and then on the other end of the spectrum, let's talk big palettes. So probably the biggest one is the Carnival 5 from Be Perfect, and again, this is like a mammoth. I love the mirror in here. This palette, obviously beautiful rainbow. I love the metallics in here, are so pretty. These 2 shades are like pressed glitter hybrid shades, but they actually work pretty well on the lids. And then I like that you have sort of these olivey greens blending into gray, black, and white. So I have been nothing but pleased with this palette. I think it's a beautiful palette. It's a wonderful rainbow palette, but I put it in the category of big palettes because it's one of the biggest. And then my other 2 big palettes that I wanted to mention, Rick and Morty from Glamlight. So I don't really know or care much at all about Rick and Morty. Like, I don't watch that or anything, but I thought this palette was really well done. I like all the beautiful matte colors that they chose to put in here. This metallic black in here is very, very pretty. I like the blues and greens that they picked out, and then these lighter shades also very, very nice. So I think between the mattes and the metallics, the color selection was really good for this palette. And then lastly, I had to mention Blend Bunny. This is the Surge palette, and it looks like this beautiful set of neons. You've got then your 3 rows of mattes, and this is one of the older formulas of the metallics, so I don't dig into them as much, but I do really like coming into this palette for the neons. Okay, we'll do pinks next. I had to pull out the Huda Rose Quartz. I think this is a really beautiful, kind of classy, neutral palette, and it's definitely more cool toned. I like this sort of frosty acrylic that they put this particular palette in, and then I like that several of the shades pull to like a blue duochrome flip. This one, this one, this one, and technically that one, although I don't really ever use it. I tried to use it once. I'm not a fan of that weird squishy formula. But in general, love the packaging, love the formula, love the color story of this one, so I had to include it. Then we have the Retro palette by Natasha Denona, which I'm almost throwing on the floor. And it's probably one of her most monochromatic palettes, but I do think it's also one of the nicest. I love the sort of like burgundy pinks that she has in here. And then this center shade is stunning. I don't know if this is maybe where she started to sort of play with her formulas a little bit more, and now we're seeing like really great, interesting kind of finishes in her formulas, but this one, I really like this one. And then the last pink palette that I pulled out was the Unearthly Cosmetics Sleepover palette. I haven't really bought anything from Unearthly in quite some time, just because I think like the prices are getting a little crazy, but I do really like this palette in general. I think this is a quite nice palette. The only thing that's tough for me with this palette is there's not really great transition shades. These are all pretty like bright still or very dark. So for me, it's somewhat incomplete, but I do think the actual shades that they picked out are quite nice, and I love the finishes. Like this sparkly pink to gold duochrome is very nice. Then you have this sort of white gold duochrome in here, and then this shade has like a burgundy kind of duochrome finish to it, and I really like that one too. What's next? We'll do cool tones next, I guess. And I definitely had to make sure I shouted out something from Nomad. So I pulled this particular palette because it's one of my favorites of the year. Like this has been a really, really lovely palette. I like that you have these really nice soft gradients in the mattes, and the metallics in this particular formula, in this palette, I think are different than some of what Nomad's been giving us recently. They're softer, butterier. It gives me more like the glam light vibe, and I think they hold up so nicely on the lids. They have a lot of like sparkle and dimension to them, which I really appreciate. So had to shout this one out in my cool toned set of 3. And then Natasha Xenon. This one, I know a lot of people didn't like it because it's so monochromatic, but I love it. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful palette. And again, she just has these really nice sparkly finishes in here, like the sparkly black, this sort of taupey duochrome with like a blue finish to it. I think is so pretty. I like this shade. It's like a cream to powder satin blue. Super pretty and smoky. Love that. And then lastly, Glamlight Hershey's Cookies and Cream palette. This one is so like smoky and beautiful. Yeah. It's so pretty. I literally can't help myself. When I come in here, I'm always so inspired to do like awesome looks. Even the metallic, like even the browns in this palette, I don't mind because I think there's such a cool undertone to them that it still looks very complimentary on the lids. So for me, I had to mention this palette. So let's do top 3 for collabs. Now I broke my top 3 up so that I could talk about more palettes into IP collabs and like creator collabs. So in creator collabs, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised by this one being mentioned. It's the Hella palette from Odinzai and Angeshka, and it looks like this. I think this is such a beautiful color story. I love the like swampy greens in here mixed with the pinks. This multi-chrome shade in here is like stupid pretty. I love it. And then the sparkly black, of course, I'm all about. Then I did also pick out the Giant Wolves from Annette's Makeup Corner. I think some of these Odinzai collabs are some of the most creative color stories, so that's why there's a lot of Odinzai that ends up in these videos. But this one obviously super cool toned. You still got some swampy greens in here, but then you got all these purples and blues and pinks in here. Another delicious multi-chrome in here. And this packaging is pretty cool too. Like, that's cool. And then the last one, you won't guess. I don't even know if you guys know I own this. It is the Ayo Coralie, one of her palettes out of the Part 2 collab that she did, and it looks like this. And I just like it because it's so small, but it's like so perfect because it's punchy colors, which I really like. When it comes to mattes, like I want those punchy colors. You've got a really nice black in here. This sparkly black is next level, and I like that you have this sort of chartreusey green to kind of accent everything with. The only shade I don't care about too much, of course, is the brown, but everything else in here I really like. Alright, and then when it comes to IP collabs, we've got some more Glamlight in here. I know. Glamlight on Barbie, obviously. When I got this palette, I fell in love with this palette. This is such a pretty color story. Pinks, purples, blues to this like teal row. I'm all about it. The only shades I don't really care too much about are the neutrals, but everything else in here is like 10 out of 10. The pans are really shallow though, because when I went to swatch this and put it on my lids for the first time, I actually hit pan on my first like dip into the palette. So I think these are like really, really shallow fills. Does it say in here? It's 28.8 grams and there's 24 shades. So yeah, it's like 1 gram per color. Then the other IP collab I had to shout out, of course, was the Scooby-Doo. This was my favorite palette from last year, or very nearly my favorite palette from last year. But this palette, the deep, dark, beautiful jewel tones in here. Again, blues, purples, pinks. This is like my wheelhouse, so I had to put it in here. I just had to. And then the last one, this is the palette that got me into Bella Beauté Bar, and this is the Strange and Unusual palette, and it looks like this. Now, I don't really care about the Beetlejuice franchise too much. If that's like your thing, great. I just saw this color story and was like flabbergasted because it looked so pretty and interesting to me. Obviously, there's only a handful of mattes in here. And then you have this matte with like sparkle in it. Everything else in here is like duochrome, multichrome, and I just love it. The finish on this one is gorgeous. This is so intense. These two shades are super, super bright and intense. They almost glow on your lids when you use them. I've been very impressed with this entire palette, and it has led me to a bunch of other palettes of theirs, some of which I haven't gotten to use yet. But yeah, I had to shout this one out for sure. Let's talk greens. When it comes to green palettes, I think one of the more soft green palettes that I have, but I would definitely list as a favorite, is the Sydney Grace Heaven on Earth palette. And it looks like this, just beautiful, kind of cool toned gray-ish greens. These definitely give me like the shades that you would see on stones on the side of like a riverbank, right? Like that's the kind of shades that I see here. And then you've got some really nice blues. You've got this kind of deep navy, almost black metallic in here. You've got a couple pops of like green and sort of bronze shades in here. I think this is a really well-designed palette. I think the packaging is very gorgeous. And this is the light version, by the way. So I had to make sure that I shouted that one out. And then another Odin's Eye. Odin's Eye just has some bangers, you guys. This is the Stone and Rock palette, and it looks like this. And when I'm picking out palettes for videos like this, I don't necessarily intentionally try to avoid picking duplicates from the same brand, because for some people, like, they just have their brands that they're super loyal to, and Odin's Eye is one that I have really, really enjoyed purchasing from. I like the finishes. They do a lot of like interesting textures in their palettes, and I think their color stories are interesting as well. This one is no exception. You've got, you know, the swampy greens, which I have been all about recently, and then really pretty metallic black. You've got this really pretty kind of more finely milled multichrome that's like a green to blue to purple kind of a shade in here. And this shade, every time I come in here, I have to go into this one. It's like a aqua turquoisey kind of iridescent shade. Very pretty. And then last up was the ColourPop Fresh Greens. I just think this is such a cool palette, and if I remember correctly, this is one of the Target palettes and it was only $14, so it's really not that expensive, but you just get like some soft kind of army green shades. And then this metallic in here definitely sold me on this palette. It's truly like a taupey silver shade, but it has the slightest hint of like an olivey green to it, and I think it's so pretty on the lids. Like every time I go into this palette, I end up using that shade regardless of what I do with this eye look. All right, getting into blues, I have the Niebieski 2020 palette. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, because I'm sure I'm not. But it looks like this is one of the Glam Shop palettes, and her finishes on her palettes are just so stupid pretty. The metallics in here are quite nice, and this one is an iridescent multichrome. It's got like a blue when the light is directly facing it, and it has so much like sparkle and dimension. It just looks stunning all over the lids. So for me, I had to mention this palette. And then I did also want to mention Blueberry Muffin from BH Cosmetics. Again, another really pretty kind of soft, cool toned blue color story. I like this super deep metallic here. The sort of blurbly shades that are in here are kind of like hit or miss in terms of the quality. But the other shades in here I think are really pretty, and I don't actually even mind the sort of neutrals that they put in because I think they're cool toned enough and deep enough that they're still very complementary to the rest of the palette. And then last but not least, sorry, that face, I had to mention it. This is the Book of Magic from Beauty Bay. This is the first palette that I ever purchased from Beauty Bay. And wow, I was like completely turned on to their formulas. They're so pretty. Obviously this one, another like green, blue, purpley kind of color story that has been my vibe for quite some time. But the finishes from the Beauty Bay formulas are like, they're like Glam Light, very buttery, very smooth, easy to apply. They don't crease on me. I do use a glitter glue, but they don't crease on me. So overall, definitely had to mention this one. And then I think we just have purples and then a couple like neutrally kind of things. So in terms of monochrome, purples are last. So I'll mention Jewels and Gem, which is the other half of that Odin's Eye launch from the summer. Looks like this. Very gorgeous color story. And I think it's even more interesting than the Stone and Rock because you just have a little bit more colors that are coming in, but they're like funkier colors, funkier finishes. I feel like you don't see shades like this all the time in other color stories. So I think that's part of what draws me to this. And then of course you have these beautiful metallics in here. Duochrome, multichrome. Could not have asked for a nicer palette. So I think we were in the middle of purples. The other purple palette I wanted to mention was Berry Icy from Simply Posh Cosmetics, and I'm hoping by the time you see this video that Aurora palette has already launched and I have it in my grubby little hands, but for now this is probably my favorite launch of theirs so far. I just love the contrast of these really cool toned minty frosty blues, and then you've got like sort of these purpley burgundy shades. I would say this row is probably my least used because it's all kind of brown, but I do think there's a time and place for the purples and for these kind of burgundy shades. I like that the pans in here are removable and you can kind of shuffle things around a little bit, but I wish they didn't have those divots in there because I hate the little divot. Like, just let me use a magnet, you know? And then lastly in this particular roundup is the Age of Opulence from Beauty Bay. Again, this packaging, like this design is not for me, but the color story I think is really pretty. Again, you have beautiful matte shades that are very deep, intense jewel tones, and then some metallics that are very complementary to that. I don't care too much for the neutrals that are in here, but they're not bad quality. They're just not my primary vibe. When I come in here, I want jewel tones. And then let's do some neutrals now. So I have 3 palettes that I picked out for warm tone neutrals, 3 that I picked out for cool tone neutrals, and then I have one more like sort of honorable mention collection at the very end. So for cool toned, I picked out the ColourPop Troublemaker palette. Again, this one is just really pretty. You've got sort of the like mauvey gray color story in here, and I think this shade is super pretty. It's not, oh there it is. Yeah, it's got a very nice like duochrome quality to it, and then this shade should have a duochrome quality, but it's a little bit softer. This silver in here is like top notch, 100% recommend. And then this one is a super shock, so very pretty to go with the rest of the colors. And then I have Blend Bunny Dollhouse, which I somehow managed to get something blue on it. Ugh. Story of my life. But it looks like this, and I love this color story. This is such a pretty color story. I love the gradients that we have, this sort of like olivey row, the burgundy row, the purple row, and then this very cool toned row I think are so well thought out. And then I do really like the metallics that she has in here, particularly these like 3. Every time I come in here I have a hard time not picking those shades up because I just think they're so pretty. And then lastly in the cool toned, I'll say the Beauty Bay Neutral palette, which was a Christmas gift last year from my mom and my stepdad. Very beautiful palette, and it doesn't look very roughly used, but I'm pretty gentle on my palettes. I just think this is a really, really pretty color story. I love all the soft mauve tones in here. Did it need to be this big? No. Did they have a smaller one? Yes. But the actual shades that I was the most interested in this particular palette were not in the smaller ones, of course. So I had to get the bigger one. But these top 2 rows, I could kind of take or leave. If they just gave me these bottom 4 rows, I would have been just fine. And then warm tone neutrals. I know you guys are probably surprised that I even own warm tone neutrals because, like, why? But I have 3 to share with you. One is one of the oldest palettes in my collection. This is the Makeup Geek and Manny MUA. This is like his original collab. And obviously this one is running a little bit like warmer to neutral. He has one of these blue brown shades in here. I think he does that in almost every single collab palette that he does, and I think it just must be one of his favorite shades or one of his favorite like formulas because he does it so often. But I really liked coming in here for this red shade. I would deepen up the outer corner with this shade and then use either one of these shades in my crease and then this all over the lid. That was like my classic look that I did with this palette. Back when I was using this palette regularly, I was still kind of afraid of colors, so I wasn't getting like super deep in a lot of the looks that I was doing. And then ColourPop Limoncello, another favorite for me. Not only is the packaging divine, but I do really like this color story. I like, if I'm gonna have a neutral palette, I like it to be more like orangey, mustardy neutrals rather than like orangey brown neutrals. For some reason those are just not my vibe. I don't know, I probably have PTSD from the Morphe 35O, which I've never owned, but it just was in my face so much. But this palette I think is very pretty. I love the pop of blue that you have in here, this slightly olivey metallic, and then this really nice like yellowy gold metallic. I think this palette was really well thought out. And then last but not least, Urban Decay Naked Honey. I know, this was a gift from my mom too, and I love it so much. When I come in here, I'm always getting this shade out because it's such a pretty, like, it's not gold. It's like, it has this sort of like greeny overtone to it that just makes it a little bit different, a little bit special. And I think the mattes that they have in this particular palette are also quite complimentary. I do almost wish there was something a little bit deeper in this palette because now that I'm more comfortable with deep tones, I feel like this is still a little bit too mid-tone for me, but in general I think this is a really nice color story. And then last but not least, I wanted to share my top 3 gradient palettes. So I have obviously a lot of Blend Bunny palettes that have lots of gradients in them, but I wanted to kind of shout out a couple others too. So I'll start with my Blend Bunny one and work backwards. Blend Bunny Sugar and Grunge, definitely wanted to make sure that I mentioned this palette. I also considered Lure for this particular prompt, but ultimately I think this one I love just a little bit more, and I just like the like sort of springy greens that are in here, the purples, even these like kind of burgundy shades I think look really nice. And I know this was like when she first started messing around with the layouts, and this didn't bother me as much as the, what is it, the Sickly Sweet one where it's like everything is just scrambled. For some reason that one just bothers me. I find her gradients so satisfying to look at. And then I love the packaging for this one. I think this is really cool, so had to mention it. And then I wanted to mention the Aurora Struck palette from ColourPop as well. This one is a really pretty color story. Looks like this, and you just have these beautiful gradients of purples, pinks, some greens, some grays, some blues. Like, there is just beautiful gradients the whole way across this palette. The finishes in this palette for the metallics and duochromes I think are very soft. So if you're somebody that likes really punchy shades, you'll probably feel a little bit, you know, like they're lacking a little bit. But in general, I think this is a really pretty color story, and you go from super light to super dark in all of the rows. And then the last one that I wanted to mention, and this is actually the last palette of the last section of this video, so if you made it this far, props to you. But the last one I'm going to mention is Lovelock's Beauty. This is the Pretty Powerful, I think it's actually the Pretty Powerful 2 palette. I think it is the Pretty Powerful 2, like I think this is the second iteration, but it looks like this. I love this sort of like holographic paint splatter thing. And then in the actual individual pans, you can see like in Trance, in this shade right here, they have these like flakes kind of imbued into the pans. This one does too. And I think that is such a cool addition. Now when I put these on my eyes, I feel like that gets lost a little bit. So for me, it's like it's so pretty to look at here, but it doesn't translate very well onto the lids. So I think this one is more like aesthetically pleasing than it is truly like useful in that perspective. But I do also think that the mattes in here are really pretty. They're very buttery, easy to blend out together. They make a gorgeous gradient. So I wanted to make sure that I shouted this one out too. All right. And with that said, that is everything for this video. I want to thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you go, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!